Well, that was boring. So Superman Returns was a movie released in 2006 starring Brandon Routh as Superman, Kate Bosworth, James Marsden and Kevin Spacey, and directed by Bryan Singer. Now the first thing to point out about this movie is where it sits in the wider universe. This is supposed to be the same version of Superman as Christopher Reeve, and it is supposed to be set in the same universe. And where it's set is somewhere between number 2 and number 3. So after Superman 2, but before Superman 3. And the first thing that really hits me about this movie is the sense of nostalgia that comes with it. Not only have they inserted it into the same universe, but they've also used the same features that come alongside or what you associate with the original movies. So you get the same sort of text in the opening credits, you get the same theme running through it as well. It all takes place in the same sort of style. And the second thing it does really well is it lets you know very sort of early on where exactly it fits in with the wider universe. Having said that, this movie is littered with quite a few problems, and to sum it all up very quickly early on, this movie is a bore fest up until the final act. The final act in this movie saves it and is just, it's almost like two movies merged together as one. So the movie begins by letting us know that it's been sort of several years since the end of the second movie, and the fact that Superman has discovered that astrologists have found the ruins of Krypton, and he has gone off to search the ruins of Krypton to ascertain whether or not there's any possibility of life, but at the same time to go and investigate it and see it all for himself. During that time, what we learn is that Lex Luthor has been in prison during that time when Superman left, but have filed multiple appeals during that process, and one appeal was hinging on Superman's testimony, which he wasn't around to give it, and therefore they released Lex Luthor earlier than he should have been. Now we join Lex Luthor as he's essentially joining or laying with a woman on her deathbed, and it's hinted that he has done some, let's say, morally questionable things with this lady in order to insert himself into her will and get control of her estate upon her death. She signs it before dying, and he helps her finish off her signature by manipulating her dead hand. And he has then got control of all of her assets, and in particular her large luxury yacht. Superman returns to Earth and he crashes in a spaceship similar to that which he first arrived to Earth in, so a Kryptonian ship, which crashes outside the Kent farm. We then see Clark try and reinsert himself into the life that he left behind, and going back to the Daily Planet, getting his job back and catching up with characters like Jimmy and learning about Lois, how she's moved on. Now, Lois in this film is the most interesting part of it. She's the most interesting character because so much has sort of happened to her in the time that Superman has been away, and her character has developed so much more than you would expect. She's ultimately won a Pulitzer Prize, something that she was always seeking to win, and won it by writing an article about the world not needing Superman anymore, showing that she has moved on from Superman. She's left him in her past and has found a new relationship with Perry White's nephew, who's played by James Marsden, and has got a child as well. This is the problem with this film, is that, I mean, it starts off quite promising in the fact that you see Lois sort of doing an interview or running a story with a new plane spaceship sort of crossover. Something goes wrong with that, which is caused by an EMP that is ultimately caused by Lex Luthor. We'll go into that. But that causes Superman to have to rush to her defense. And the cool thing about this part with the plane crash is that you see that there's nobody calling out for Superman. He has been gone for so long that no one expects Superman to turn up. And when he does turn up, everyone is just stunned and shocked. And it is a really good moment. He rescues everyone on the plane and then departs with a classic Christopher Reeve sign-off, reminding everybody that flying is the safest form of travel before going off again. And you get the nostalgic feeling of that Boy Scout that's there and has always been there as part of Superman's character. But then it begins to fall down, and it's because of it's because of Clark and Superman's reaction to Lois moving on. Superman and Clark are always two different characters, but this time they are one in the same. You don't really see much difference in like Clark Kent's appearance or his behavior compared to Superman. It's all as if Superman is just a bit quieter than usual. But the key thing is the way they behave towards Lois, and it's one thing to pine after somebody who you always felt as though you had that connection with, and then because you left to go and pursue or find out more about your past, and with your hopes up that you might come across someone else who belongs to that world, to only to have them dash because you find out you are the only one remaining, to then come back and see that the woman you fall in love with has moved on as well is heartbreaking. But it doesn't mean that you turn into a stalker by following her everywhere she goes and listening to every single conversation she has in private and following her to her house, using your x-ray vision to look through the walls and watch her in her family dynamic and see if there's any holes or any issues going on. All of that is ridiculously creepy and should not be in this film. And annoyingly, that whole subplot with Superman pining after Lois and following her and stalking her and wanting more out of their relationship, but not getting that, that takes up so much of this movie, and it's frustrating to watch because it just doesn't progress. It just slows it down to a snail's pace, and you just sit there wondering when something is going to happen. The one thing that's driving this plot forward is Lex Luthor and his plan moving forward. Now, Lex Luthor takes the yacht that he's inherited and goes to the Fortress of Solitude, learns more about the crystals from Marlon Brando's Jor-El that reappears in a hologram, and he takes the crystals knowing that by submerging them in water they can grow into a large landmass. His plan ultimately is once again a real estate scam, much like the first movie. This time it is all about him creating a new landmass to then sell onto the highest bidder, mainly because it's imbued with alien technology, sort of Kryptonian sort of architecture and bits and pieces like that, and at the same time that forming its own landmass next to the United States will ultimately sink part of the United States. There is an issue with that plan which I'll go in later on, but he goes about by sort of experimenting with a sort of a shard off that crystal to see whether or not it will work. That causes an EMP blast, which then takes out the electricity in the entire city, including the airplane that Lois on, which causes the crash for Superman to save her from. But Lex Luthor sort of develops his plan a bit further on by stealing a lump of kryptonite from a museum, and he basically salvages all the kryptonite out of the meteorite, turns it into a hollow tube, and inserts the crystal inside it before launching it into the sea, and it forms a large landmass which is imbued with kryptonite. A very intelligent plan from someone who is shown in this movie to be as intelligent as actually what he boasts this time. And yeah, he does sort of try and have that same charm as what Gene Hackman's sort of version of the character does, but it is just missing that charm that I think only really Gene Hackman can bring to that role. Anyway, Lois sort of discovers this plan. I mean, again, like I say, she is the best character in this, and it is just epitomised the fact of she wants to run with this blackout story because obviously it affected her, but it affected so many people that she wants to know what caused it. She's told by Perry White, "You're not investigating that. Clark Kent is investigating it. I want you on the number one story, which is Superman Returns. Get me another interview with him." She gets an interview with Superman where she learns that the reason why he went away and the fact he didn't say goodbye, and she manages to get that out off her chest as to the fact why she moved on from him and turned so bitter against him, as the fact that he left without saying goodbye to her. He takes her up and he says, "Look, you say that the world doesn't need Superman, but every day I hear everyone calling out for a saviour, which I am." But after she does that work, she then carries on investigating the blackout, which Clark just seems to just let slip and let go by because he does very little actual journalistic work in this movie, to the point where even though he's hired after 5-year absence, I mean, the question is, why? What reason did you say that you were going away for 5 years or wouldn't be able to work for 5 years? And at the same time, why would someone just suddenly hire you back and then showing that you're a poor journalist at the very least of it by not working on the story you've been assigned? But anyway, Lois's investigation to the blackout sort of brings her to one source, or one place where it's all generated from, and that is Luther's sort of new mansion he's inherited. She goes there with her son on the way to a party. They end up walking into the boat and both end up kidnapped after bumping into Lex Luthor. They see this land mass be created, and the mass sort of pierces the boat, causes it to crash, and she's trapped alongside her husband who's gone to save her, or her longtime boyfriend, sorry, who's gone to save her along with her kid, and they're sinking and about to die. Superman comes along, he saves them, he puts them on the plane that James Marsden's character brought in to save Lois. They fly off, and Superman goes off to face Lex Luthor, unaware that the kryptonite in the rocks is affecting him, seemingly unaware that he is actually weaker than what he should be. Lex Luthor is able to get his cronies to beat down Superman, and at the same time, once he's completely weakened, Lex then pulls out a kryptonite dagger that he has sharpened, stabs Superman, lets him plummet before he's saved by Lois. Superman manages to go up and regenerate himself in the sun before going back to the landmass, cutting a hole into the core and then lifting it up into outer space and launching it off. Despite the weakness that the kryptonite is causing him, his will governs and reigns out supreme, and he manages to do his duty. He manages to save the world. Lex Luthor, when this sort of landmass is being lifted, he tries to get off. He does get off of a helicopter, but his right-hand woman that's been with him throughout the entirety of his plans realizes actually the extent of the deaths that this whole plan is going to cause, and then dumps the crystals and prevents Lex from sort of doing this again. Superman ends up in intensive care, completely drained and knocked out from the exposure to the kryptonite, and it's there where essentially the whole civilization of the human race comes to his aid. You get them, or some of them, in the hospital, sort of working directly to save him, but at the same time, everyone's gathered outside to hold a vigil and pray that he will make it through. Lois and her son go and visit him, and it's there that she reveals that her son, who you think is James Marsden's son, isn't actually his son. It's actually Clark Kent's, or Superman's, kid from the point in Superman 2 where they slept together. Which makes you wonder, I mean, there is a whole dynamic where James Marsden's character seems jealous of Superman because Lois clearly has feelings for him still and is in love, and he acts like a jealous sort of new partner to the ex, and you sort of wonder, how does he take that news? Because surely she's got to tell him. Does he already know that their kid isn't actually his kid and he's raising Superman's kids? It's just messy. It really is. But anyway, Lois sort of tells him that news. She gives him a kiss. The kid gives him a kiss, and Superman then revives and delivers the speech to the kid when he's asleep. The same speech that Jor-El gave him, he delivers to the kid, which is a nice little nod. He then flies off. He says goodbye to Lois, explains he'll always be around, and the one thing that I'm just a sucker for is that they recreate the trademark final shot from all the other Superman movies, Christopher Reeve. They remake that in this with Brandon Routh, and it just hits you so hard. Now, the point where this movie is saved is when Superman goes after Lex Luthor after the landmass is created. That whole part of the movie is fantastic. It really is exactly what you'd want from a returning Superman movie. The problem with this movie is that it's over 2.5 hours long and not much happens in it. Other than the final 45 minutes, the rest of it is just dull. We have so many interesting concepts that could have been latched upon. We have the idea that Superman comes back into the world and everything has moved on past him. I get that he's got to interact and sort of, insert himself back to where he left off, and the fact that other characters would move on without him. I understand all of that, but at no point do you have to dedicate such a heavy part of the story to Lois Lane moving on with her life. A stronger thing to latch onto would have been the rest of the world moving on without Superman, which is just personified by Lois Lane's article. If the rest of the world has moved on, then that symbol of hope is now gone as well, and it needs to be reignited. Superman needs to demonstrate why the world needs him, why the world needs Superman, and that should have been the theme of it. Does the world need Superman? Or why the world needs Superman? It's there that we should have had either a secondary villain or Lex Luthor hatching a plan that only Superman would be able to stop, and therefore answering the question of why the world needs Superman. Now, the next part where the movie falls down and is weak isn't really anyone's fault. Brandon Routh and Kevin Spacey do good jobs as Superman and Lex Luthor. They really do. But the problem is that it's set in the same universe as Gene Hackman and Christopher Reeve, and those two actors just brought something new to the table that had never been done, and I don't think has been done since. The charisma of both of those actors and the way that they bring their own part to the role just sets them completely at opposite ends of the table. And you can see that, you know, Superman is the embodiment of good, Lex Luthor is the pure embodiment of evil, and when they have those conversations together, it's two conflicting ideologies just going to battle with each other. In this movie, they try to have that standoff with the two of them, and they've changed Lex Luthor. I think they've made some positive changes with him in the fact that he's a lot more menacing, he's much more stoic. He does have the few lines about bragging about his intelligence still, which I always enjoyed. But this has a little bit more weight behind it because not only does he demonstrate that, but he also demonstrates a ruthless streak to him. And there's always, you get the sense it's always cogs turning. Just like when he picks up the shard of kryptonite and you sort of think, oh, that's just a discarded shard. But he turns it into a knife to stab Superman with, which he uses. He clearly sees 3 or 4 moves ahead. And the fact he does it himself as well, he doesn't leave it to anybody else to stab him, he gets involved and does it himself, is also something that the previous Luthor hasn't really done other than tricking Superman with the kryptonite sort of necklace. And that brings so much more weight to that character, the fact of he's willing to get his hands dirty and makes him so much more dangerous. Those changes are positive, but the issue with Brandon Routh's Superman and Clark Kent is that there isn't really enough screen time with Clark Kent to show him as a different persona. And it doesn't really give Brandon Routh the opportunity to show off that he can do the same as what Christopher Reeve was able to do. That question for me is still unanswered, and I do like him as Superman. I think he does embody that sort of bright symbol of hope that Christopher Reeve brought to it. And I do like the fact they've kept the suit very similar as well. There's no muscle suit behind it. It's very organic and very pure to the original. But there's just something missing, and I think it is just a charm that Christopher Reeve brought. The other issue I have with this film is I commend it for inserting itself into the same universe as the original Superman films. But if you're going to do that, stick to it. They seem to have just gone down the route of Superman 1 and 2 happened, and then there's our film, and Superman 3 and 4 didn't happen, we'll ignore those. We've re-established an order of Superman 1, 2, and Superman Returns. And in actual fact, it would have been better off as a standalone movie. I mean, the way to sort of look at this film is perhaps it being set in an alternative universe, just off the back end, like an alternative story, as if what could have happened had in place of number 3, perhaps. But again, it's just that whole confusing concept that comes about it, and it does take you out of the film. But the one good thing about that is that it does distract you from how long you're sat through the whole Stalker Superman storyline, because that, honestly, I do not understand what anyone was thinking to have a movie drag on for so long with so little happening in it. But having said all that, this movie does do some fantastic things, and it's mainly around the use of its nostalgia. It's used it properly and in the correct way, and used to tie it in with the previous 2 movies, or Superman 1 and 2 that came before it, where it's set. The reusing of Marlon Brando, absolutely perfection. To reincorporate that into the story is fantastic. To then do the callback to that with Superman passing that down to his own son, brilliant. Absolutely fantastic decision in that. Like I said, the use of the same logo or the same font and the same credits, the same theme at the beginning and the exact same way it happens, and recreating the final shot as well to close it all off, absolutely superb. But overall, this movie does struggle to hold attention. It really does feel as though you have to push yourself through the first 3/4 of the film in order to get to the final part, which does make it worthwhile watching, because it is a fantastic piece of well, it is a fantastically entertaining movie from that point onwards. The dynamic between Superman and Lex Luthor's sort of more ruthless and menacing nature is just, yeah, it's great to watch, and it everything like the nostalgia then all ties together, and it's a really good way to sort of end the movie as well. It does have its flaws, it does have a lot of flaws, but again, the way they've written Lois Lane is just, it's fantastic in this film, and it's nice to actually see her become such an interesting character behind it. For those reasons, I mean, I'm personally, if it was the final act onwards, it would be sitting there at 4 stars, but unfortunately it's not, and with those weaknesses, it is a 3-star review. So that was my review of Superman Returns. What did you guys think about it? Whatever you guys thought, pop it in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll be back with Man of Steel. But until then, you guys take it easy, and I'll catch you on the next one.